Hello, good morning, good afternoon. It should be noon now. Thanks for coming to the program today. I'm Philip Brookman, consulting curator in the Department of Photographs here. And our program today is a conversation with Susan Meiselas and Carolyn Drake, two amazing photographers who are here in connection to our exhibition, Dorothea Lange, Seeing People. And I just want to say that this is the National Gallery's annual Arnold Newman lecture. So I want to thank the Arnold Newman Foundation for ongoing funding for this project. It's something we do every year. A talk that is in some way connected to photography and portraiture. And so thank you, Arnold, for all of your support over the years. And I also want to mention that if you haven't yet seen our exhibition, Dorothea Lange Seeing People, it's open today and is open through the end of March. So please see the show. And we're going to be talking a bit about that today as well. And of course, thank you to Daniel Greenberg and Susan Steinhauser for the amazing gift of 168 photographs by Dorothea Lange, which came into the National Gallery in 2016 and 2018, and is really the foundation for this whole project. So I'm going to just quickly introduce our two participants, Susan and Carolyn, and then they're going to give brief presentations about their work, aspects of their work, and then we'll have a conversation, and hopefully we'll have time for some questions afterward. So best known for her 1970s photographs of war-torn Nicaragua, and carnival strippers in New England. American photographer Susan Meiselas was born in 1948 in Baltimore and has been affiliated with Magnum Photos since 1976. And she's also president of the Magnum Foundation. Meiselas attended Harvard University, where she engaged with documentary photography and filmmaking. And after documenting and publishing her photographs of the insurrection in Nicaragua in the late 1970s. She also photographed the violence between government and rebel forces in El Salvador. Beginning in 1992, Meiselas developed a photographic history of Kurdistan, resulting in the book Kurdistan in the Shadow of History and the corresponding website, AKA Kurdistan. She's published numerous books of her own photographs and edited and contributed to many others. Her photographs have been published all over the place in newspapers and magazines. 1979, she received the Robert Capa Gold Medal and was awarded a MacArthur Fellowship in 1992. In 2006, she received the Royal Photographic Society's Centenary Medal and Honorary Fellowship. And in 2019, the Deutsche Börse Photography Foundation Prize. Her books include Carnival Strippers, Nicaragua, June 1978 to July 1979. El Salvador, the work of 30 photographers, Pandora's Box, Encounters with the Dani, and many others, ongoing until now. Carolyn Drake is an American photographer based in Vallejo, California. She was born in California in 1971. And studied media culture and history at Brown University. She began working as a photographer at the age of 30, and Drake works on long-term photo-based projects that question dominant narratives and create alternative stories. Her work is often about community and the connections between people. She's used the idea of collaboration to engage people in her process. And sometimes her work incorporates other media like collage, drawing, sewing, text, and found images. In 2006, Carolyn moved to Ukraine and then to Istanbul, where she lived until 2013. From there, she worked on two long-term projects, one called Two Rivers, about the Central Asian countries that had been part of the Soviet Union, and also Wild Pigeon on the Chinese side of Central Asia, where she spent 7 years visiting Xinjiang and photographing the Uyghur communities there. And these projects, called Two Rivers and Wild Pigeons, were shown at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art in 2018. So then in 2013, Drake returned to the United States to photograph in Water Valley, Mississippi, and Athens, Georgia, and now lives in Vallejo, California, as I said. Drake is also a member of Magnum Photos and has received a Guggenheim Fellowship, the Dorothea Lange Paul Taylor Prize, a Fulbright Fellowship, a World Press Photo Award, and the Henri Cartier-Bresson Foundation, and the Henri Cartier-Bresson Award. Her exhibition, Men Untitled, was until quite recently on view at the Cartier-Bresson Foundation in Paris, and her books include Two Rivers, Wild Pigeons, Internet, and Knit Club, and the recently published Men Untitled. So now I want to welcome Susan and Carolyn. I think Susan will speak first and present something of her work, and then Carolyn will follow, and then we'll have a conversation. Dope.
So our big challenge is how to be conversational in presentational mode. And I'm going to try, because I think when Philip invited us, and only recently we talked about what we might talk about, it was the idea of revisiting Lange for probably both Carolyn and I. I mean, I hadn't seen or thought about Dorothea Lange in a while, though Sarah Meister had a wonderful show at MoMA not that long ago. But then it was more a question of how was I going to revisit my work or think about some choices I may have made? And I think Philip may have invited both of us to have that reflection without its being academic intention and presented that way. But I started to think about, so Dorothea Lange had a studio. All of you've been to the show and you saw these beautiful portraits. And I was thinking, my studio was my street, right in front of my house. I was living in Mott Street, and I still live where I was living. And so I'm kind of interested in looking at two series I'm going to show, relatively short as I can be, and think about relationships in time, which is a little different than some of what Dorothea Lange was doing, from my understanding, meaning more singular encounters. And I was thinking about, so one contrast is Prince Street Girls. This series is a series of encounters, accidental encounters, not intentional, no project, no plan, over time. And the second project I'm going to show you briefly is one place. And I think that's also interesting, somewhat different than Dorothea was working. So this is three of the girls that were part of Prince Street Girls. This is the corner, literally a half a block from my house. And it's the corner they were told they had to stay on. So their parents were concerned about, after they left school, Catholic school right on the corner. And I became fascinated by this corner and this group of girls. So when you think about, whose stories do you tell? I wouldn't have even had that question in mind. I just was bumping into them and fascinated by the various relationships that I was observing on the street. And, looking back at them, of course, this is a particular time. So this is 1972, 3, 4, 5, somewhere in there. And As I said, it's not intentional, but I'm encountering them. So I'm on my way to the market and there they are. I don't think they were really posing for me. I think they're really posing for each other. It's this sort of fashionable age. They're kind of becoming young women. And I think a lot about that, and you'll see more in terms of Carolyn's work, this idea of to what extent you're interacting, to what extent you're observing, to what extent they're reenacting themselves, and how much you're directing. So I was thinking a lot about that, looking at Lange and revisiting this work. I am basically following these girls. Anywhere they went, if I happened to be in the hood, they'd sometimes knock on my door, or I would just say, where are you going Saturday? To the beach. I went to the beach. I went on the subway, etc. I'm not going to show you all the series, all the parts of the series. This is Carol, who hates this photograph today. I still know these girls. They're 50 years later. They're still in my life, and how they see them. The pictures I made of them in time is interesting to me, and I try to keep a record of, in some way, of that. So I'm making photographs as I'm just living alongside them. They are aging. I'm aging. I'm also leaving the neighborhood, as you heard from Philip. I'm going to Central America. I'm coming in and out of the neighborhood. I leave my bags packed most of the time, and they don't know where I go, and they have no idea what I'm doing, essentially. But I come back, and each time coming back, there's this evolution. I'm trying to capture just what time is like in their lives. So the girl on the left, Pebbles, now lives in Naples. She has 5 children and something like 15 grandchildren. It's hard to look at the photographs and think about time because it's so frozen, these moments in their lives. This is Lisa, Jojo on the left. And I love that, they're still best friends. She's the best girl at the wedding. I missed some of the weddings. I caught some of the other weddings. And there was a juncture in which I wasn't really sure what to do with this work. And I was, again, this is probably just when I'm really embedded in Central America. So I'm there longer and longer periods. If I come back and happen to intersect with them, I was lucky. So it was great to be at Lisa's wedding. I'm going to show a very short clip. I think you guys activated maybe up there. This is just to listen because I'm capturing Frankie, the one boy who hung out with the girls, and his perception of them. And I think the guys back there have to activate it. Yes, no? Oh, yeah, you have to. I think you have to activate it, guys.
When I look at these pictures, where are all these little girls? They vanished.
Did they leave in waves? Did they leave together?
Well, all the girls started to get married, and as they got married, they just wanted a better life. And it was hard. It was, a lot of them didn't want to be like their grandmothers, walking up flights of steps. But the crazy thing is, all of their children, they all come to the city. They left, and their kids are coming back. But there's nothing to come back to. I mean, you'd have to sell your kidney to live here.
So Frankie's still there. I'm still there, and all the girls live somewhere between Staten Island, New Jersey, Brooklyn. And as I said, I still see them randomly as they come. They do bring their kids back. We have a dinner every once in a while. So it's almost a 50-year relationship. I still don't know how to bring it all together, because it's more and more about their pictures they've met of themselves, of their families. Is there an interesting reference back to this earlier work? So that's a question. The second part is more about a place and a different intention. And that's part of my questions about Lange. And of course, we know about FSA, and she was commissioned to do this work, and she's moving around the country, something probably Carolyn and I would love to have the possibility to do, whether or not we'd want to do it under the auspices of a government. I received a commission in England in a particular area of England, the North Industrial area, outside of Birmingham. And it was to come to the region. They've invited many different artists of different mediums in and out of the community. And just if there was something of interest, to stay and develop a body of work. So that's a luxury, that's a privilege that's very rare. And in this case, I had done some work probably almost 20 years before in San Francisco about domestic violence. And when I was researching the area, I read that there was a very high incidence of domestic violence in this area. I then discovered there were something like 300 services, refuges, what they call refuge, we would call shelters, and various kinds of services. So this one place I visited amongst many others, I walked in the door. There was an art room right away that felt welcoming. And I just had the sense that this was a place I could work with women. So to perhaps find a way to tell their stories. And I think this is an interesting question with Lange says, whose stories do you tell, right? If you're the catalyst or you're the channel, you're the bridge, whatever. I felt the only way to do this work was through a workshop mode. So I worked with a couple of local artists, an illustrator, a writer, and we developed and cooks, and we invited women, if they were interested, to come to a series of workshops. One of the first ones was about food, and for them to identify with a food and begin to write. So it wasn't sit down and tell us your story, how'd you get there? It was much more responsive. I love this one. I am a piece of toast, soft and buttery, but burnt around the edges. That was the moment where I thought, wow, this is interesting, kind of how there's a kind of opening. The other was more focused, for example, on collage materials, and they were cutting up magazines. These aren't the homes they live in. These are the homes they may have left. These are the homes that they might dream to go back to or recreate. So that was a very poignant process. But the big breakthrough for me was when they invited me into their rooms. And suddenly I saw the room was the landscape, was the portrait, was the mirror of their state of mind, of their state of being. And the project kind of took a whole nother stage at that point. So one of the things we did in the refuge is we started, you see these blue lines. I would make a photograph, I'd date it, give it to them. Maybe a day or so later, I'd have an interview with them, make an excerpt. So I was doing all the work in the hotel to produce what they would then see going up day by day by day in the refuge or the shelter. So I love this idea that with women, I was making something for women. Obviously, there were constraints, the most important being the place had to be obscure. I had to be very sensitive to no location revealed or no faces. And I loved even just these little notes that the women would leave for each other when they left the shelter. So I'm both documenting the rooms, this being the emergency room, always available for someone for as long as they need. And also, sometimes an empty room suggested that somebody did not want to stay. Whereas you see this room, which is Janet's room, and she came from Poland. She had a daughter. She wanted it to be as normal as possible. So there was common space, but very often not that many connections between them. And just trying to find the little moments, again, mostly in a kind of observational style, but invited into their lives for this very particular period of time. I think there are a few portraits. Again, this is a little clip just to give you a sense, because I think ultimately more and more I'm interested in the relationships that grow in time, and you work with somebody, you're making a book, but do they even understand what a book is and that they're going to be in the book? So this is just a little clip. If they can roll it. It's supposed to go automatically, but I think it's not going automatically. Whoever's up there. Can you hear it? Oh, you can't hear it. She's desperately looking for herself when I bring the book back. I mean, so this is the book we made for the shelter to raise money for the shelter. I'm sorry you can't hear the sound. I don't know what happened, but she basically says, "Where am I? Where am I? Where am I?" And so, she's part of this whole community that's been working together, and I'm astounded that all she's looking for is her own picture. But I guess that's kind of true to form. We all want to just see ourselves. So she finally finds her place. And she makes a life map. That was one of the other projects. She's ready to leave. She'd been there for 2 years. One of the things she found in her dresser was she shared with me that she'd been in 4 different rooms and she'd drawn all the rooms and exactly what she had each time. But 2.5 years is a long time. And most beautiful moment with her, aside from her looking for herself, was that she gave me her diary, which was the diary that all the women before they went back out of the shelter had to go through a process talking about power in their relationships. And she wanted every woman to be able to hold that when they opened the book. And so that's essentially, I think for me, it's not just it's that whole process of meeting and making connections and then making something with people, and then how do they understand what it is, and then it becomes public. So, there's this clip, or if we had more time, my Instagram feed, she's now out of the refuge. She now has a child, and it's a whole new chapter of her life. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. Oops. Okay, so I actually have some notes that I prepared that I'll kind of be returning to if my eyes can reach that far. And hopefully I'll engage in the more casual dialogue once I finish, when we sit down together over there. So I'm not exactly a photographer you'd look at and immediately say, "Oh yeah, Dorothea Lange, let's invite her to a panel about Dorothea Lange." Especially with my most recent work, I've been actually photographing myself. A lot of kind of setting up an impromptu studio in my backyard and borrowing studios of friends. So it took me a while to figure out what work I would show alongside a discussion about Dorothea Lange. And I decided to show this work that I've been building close to home in Vallejo, California, where I've lived since 2016. One of the things that struck me while reading more about Lange and her work is how dramatically her practice shifted over time. And so from in the beginning, running a portrait studio where she would be commissioned to make beautiful photographs of wealthy people in San Francisco, to the kind of work that she's most well known for, which is kind of going out in the street and on the road, away from her comfort zone, and making empathetic pictures of marginalized people. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk about my neighborhood work in relation to Lange because, number one, because I made this work in the same state where she made a lot of her work. And also because I see a lot of the same issues playing out right now, almost 100 years later, in a very different image world than she occupied. And I've been trying to find out ways to address that in my work. So these first few images I made the first couple of years after I moved to Vallejo. I would go out on the street and wander around with my camera on my shoulder, looking for interesting characters and scenes. And so in this image I made pretty soon after I moved there. Actually, I made this one before I even moved there. And I was just on the street and I happened to notice a guy walking out of the corner store, stealing a bottle of wine. And so the store owner came out and was calling the police while trying to retrieve the wine from him. And as I kept shooting on the streets, I started to feel this uncomfortable divide between the people who I would encounter there and photograph out in the public spaces, and other people who seemed to be invisible, hidden behind their curtains and fences and privacy shrubs. And so that became more interesting to me than the subjects. It seemed to me that it would be more meaningful to find a way to look at that divide and think about where it came from than to continue just going out on the street and photographing these people who had kind of faced a rough place in their life. And soon after I moved into Vallejo, also, I had a landlady who invited me to join this website called Nextdoor, which probably a lot of you have heard of. And I became really interested in the crime and safety section of this website. And it seemed to me this place where these two contrasting worlds came together. People would post texts and photographs of strangers they would see out on the street and people that they thought were suspicious and that you should be afraid of. And so I kind of started directing my project towards appropriating some of that material and thinking about how I could use it to ask questions about why we have this divide, and also the ways, well, I'll tell about this later. So I have the subject lines from these posts people would make on Nextdoor, and then I have a more detailed quote of what they wrote that I can read. Plane flying over Via Vista, California Highway Patrol are searching for a fugitive. I can hear the loudspeaker. You are completely surrounded. Best that everyone stays indoors until the fugitive is caught. Today around 3 p.m. while driving home, I saw a very attractive, well-groomed young lady walking on Marin Street. About 45 minutes later, I saw the same young lady walking down Sacramento Street, heading towards Tennessee. She may simply be out enjoying a beautiful day, and I'm not jumping to conclusions, and the writer goes on to claim that this woman is a prostitute, and therefore we should be afraid of her. Two men casing the house 517 Brancefort. They spent 5 to 8 minutes looking at how to access the back of the house. And then later they describe both of the men saying hair unknown, top black sweatshirt / hoodie with black beanie, bottom black pants, shoes, black shoes. So I started taking some of these images that I found on Nextdoor and seeing what I could do to help me think about them in a different way than I was being conditioned to by this website in my neighborhood. And so I cropped, this is the close-in crop to try and identify that person who was in the background of the surveillance image. And what I did was I took these photos and printed them on fabric, and I turned them into quilts. So kind of taking this dangerous digital material and bringing it inside and making it soft and a quilt, which we associate with the safe space of your house, your bed. So I wanted to try to interfere with the truth that these surveillance images laid claim to. And I felt that the reality they offer isn't really any evidence of anything, as the people tried to claim on the website, but that the images have the effect of creating a reality that's packed with things to be afraid of and suspicious about. And also thinking about the role that camera technology nowadays plays with constructing how we perceive reality. So I kind of have this ongoing series of quilts that I'm making. This one I did a search on the website for suspicious. And if you can't see too well, but I printed out all the times that the word suspicious comes up. And so those texts are included in the detail of the quilt, and then also all of the suspicious cars that people photographed. And then I also collected fabric I found on the streets. Sometimes the government will come around and clean out homeless camps and displace the houseless people. So a lot of times there's fabric left behind. And so I collected that fabric and washed it and incorporated it into the quilts. And I'm just going to skip that one. And I'm going to kind of flip through this series of pictures from my project Knit Club. And then maybe I can talk about it more when we sit down. But this is just kind of how my photography has evolved since I started that Vallejo project. I've been playing with ways to represent people. My work deals with people still, but a lot of times you're not fully seeing the person that's in the photograph. And this work I made in Mississippi, and it's called Knit Club. And I basically worked collaboratively with these friends I had made by living there. I lived in this small town in Mississippi for 2 years, and there's a long story behind that, but basically the gist is I made a project in which I was kind of representing the community that they built and my role in it, and my kind of finding a way to create a visual language for this community that expressed my attraction to them, my friendship with them, but also the differences. I mean, one thing I was drawn to was the kind of maternal community that they had amongst themselves. And I don't have kids, and I've spent a lot of my life traveling alone. So they had this very different experience of life than I had. So it was kind of a way to work out why I chose to be who I am and how I am a woman and how I'm not a woman. So I think we can sit down and have a discussion now.
Thank you both. That was amazing. Great. I'm seeing work by both of you I didn't know, new work and old work. So I think that's one of the reasons we're here, to look, kind of deeply into what you're doing in contemporary documentary. Okay. How's this? I'm going to speak right into the microphone. So I want to ask a few questions, really in the context of Dorothea Lange's photographs and thinking about her innovations in portraiture and documentary practice. I think at the same time, I want to begin by asking both of you, how did you first get started as a photographer, and what were your goals? I know that's an impossible question, but you can Carolyn, you can start. And I think it's relevant to this because you know what I'd like to learn in some way is how much you're able to control as an artist, control like what it is that you do, as opposed to having people who commission your work or pay for it, control it. So, but
Yeah. I mean, I think my work has changed a lot over time, but it took me a long time in my life to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And I was living in New York, working in interactive media companies, and I just found photography as a way to get out of that office life bubble and engage with the world physically and be out and interacting. And that just the physical, partly the physical engagement with the world was something I yearned for. And it was learning about the world. And now, I mean, it's changed and evolved. And now I feel more like I'm kind of trying to work in dialogue with other artists who are making work that's reflecting on what's going on in the world, and trying to kind of add to that conversation and push myself to think out of the box and find different ways of thinking about the world, so that just puncturing the hole in our assumptions that we make about it, I think.
Susan, great.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that Lange really set out to be a photographer. And I think probably what we both have in common is we didn't exactly. In my case, I started teaching kids, fourth, fifth, and sixth graders, photography with pinhole cameras and in a public school. And it's funny, I was teaching them to go out into their community. And I think that obviously I learned from them and doing it with them, that's kind of what I wanted to do. But the transition didn't come until a couple of years later, when I began to do the work on carnival strippers. And then I kind of felt like I had a raison d'etre. You know, there was sort of a calling to look at the women, which I didn't show today, but were women working in public fairs as stripteasers, and I went over many years to kind of get to know them better. So it was a transition to just feeling there was a connection to making a photograph that made sense. I think our timeline is different by maybe 20 years, and what's surrounding me as I'm beginning in the 70s, even with Prince Street Girls, is, Lee Friedlander and Gary Winogrand and Deanne Arbus, and a certain thing that I'm seeing, none of which I really identify with. I don't feel comfortable in that same modality. So it took me a while, and it maybe different way than Carolyn, to find where to place myself, which I think there are intuitive, responsive parts of my work where I just read something and I say, I went to Nicaragua reading a headline. I had no idea where it was on the map. And that launched me into a completely different period of time than the work I was doing in my own neighborhood between the Prince Street Girls, and I was photographing Santa Clauses who were transforming themselves between Thanksgiving and Christmas, things that were very local and comfortable, to going beyond my boundaries and really being off-centered. And I think one thing that we have a little bit in common, and also different than Lange, I mean, Lange really had partners in publication and production, Life magazine, etc. I sort of missed that period. I caught the end of it in a way, so I had a tiny bit, but I was really self-sustaining. The only difference of our generations in a sense, is that it was possible in the 70s and 80s to have the reproduction of your work in magazines, even if you weren't on assignment. And that kept an economic kind of freelance model that you could be free to do the work you wanted to do, but you found the support on the back end. And that's very different than the front end, the back end of where work lives. And then you deal with maybe the contradictions of what happens to the work that you don't control. So the difference between, you might control the frame, but you don't control where the frame gets reframed, certainly in the media, which is why I think actually both of us are drawn to books, where it's really, as best you can make sense of the work, it's a home for the work. You have other constraints, how many pages and what size the book can be, and things that you negotiate with the publisher, but the bookmaking tradition, I think, is the real place. So there's the process, then there's this form, and then exhibitions, and which really become an even more open territory to understand the work that you've been making.
So I have a lot of questions from what you just said. I wonder if you could describe, you've done a lot of work kind of after the publication of your Nicaragua book. You did a lot of work about how those pictures were reframed in the media. Could you
Yeah.
describe a little bit? I mean, what that was?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I learned a lot from one photograph, essentially. It's the Molotov Man, and Sarah's here, and she put a beautiful, representation of the project at that time, a couple of years ago here. I didn't know when I made the photograph. So this is a photograph of a young muchacho, a young man at the time of Sandinista, throwing a Pepsi bottle Molotov cocktail at the National Guard headquarters, which you don't see in the frame. And it's just on the cusp of Somoza leaving the country, 1979. So it becomes a symbolic gesture inside the Nicaraguan discourse. And when I go back to celebrate the first anniversary of the Sandinista Revolution, his image is on the, I always want to say in fósforo in Spanish, what do you call them? Matches, matchbox covers. And it was like, wow, how'd they get that? Well, they saw it somewhere in a magazine, and then they took it and they made it. There was no exchange. It was just appropriate for them to celebrate their last glorious moment. And over the last 40 plus years, I've watched that image transform, and I've documented all the times I see it up till the last time I was in Nicaragua, which was 2018, in which the students who were fighting the Sandinista president Ortega, now in power, are wearing that image. So it's gone 360 degrees. And so that fascinates me. I mean, we can't always know where our images go, how they get reframed, and how and this goes back to Carolyn too, I'm sure, whether or not it's the trope of you bring a photograph back or you show the photograph you just made to someone, Polaroid or your digital screen, how they feel when they see themselves again as they've been envisioned by you on a wall, framed. These are wonderful questions that Dorothy didn't have the opportunity to ask, probably.
Let me think about it. I mean, I think this topic leads to, what you're saying somehow, I think, leads to the question of collaboration, which is something we're both interested in, and I think relates to Dorothea Lange. I mean, this question of the ethics of working with people and the fact that the photographer in our world, the photographer owns the photograph, but there's another person's image in it. And what does that mean? Like, why? It's like, it raises a lot of questions that, like in some ways, I think as an artist person, you don't want to dwell on ethics because it like inhibits your ambitions sometimes, but there's a lot of questions around when you're representing other people, and they have been growing and growing for the past couple of decades, like who should be owning the story of another person and what role collaboration plays in that.
So one of the things I've always been interested in your work is, the kind of edge between portraiture and documentation, really. And can you talk a little bit about how you incorporate portrait ideas? I mean, you showed some pictures in which, they're portraits, but we don't see people's faces. You see that also in our exhibition of Dorothea Lange's work, but the way that you've done it has a kind of almost masking quality. Can you talk about that?
I mean, looking at Lange's work intimidates me. I mean, it makes me, especially the way she shoots portraits in daylight, like in broad daylight, which especially if you're shooting in color, you might consider that bad light. But the way she works with light and shadow on people's faces is really beautiful to me. And I think especially as I've started shooting black and white recently, I'm really drawn to that. But my work, I have this tendency to avoid faces recently. And I think it's my battle with photography. Like I feel this need to resist the illusion, the fantasy of photography, opening access to another person's soul. And I just feel like it's false. I mean, that's my rational mind. Oh, this is a fantasy. It's false. And I want to draw attention to that, what photography does, how it plays with your emotions, and it tugs at your feelings rather than your mind. So I think I like to draw attention to that question in my work. And I think when you look at a person's face in a photograph, you're immediately drawn to their eyes and this feeling of connecting with them. And so I really, maybe I'm obsessed with that, the illusion of that. But seeing and wanting to resist that illusion, but seeing Lange's work just makes me question all of that. So, I mean, it's beautiful. Like, I love the way the light falls on these faces and in the middle of the day.
It's so funny because I was looking at those prints thinking, did she print that? Because, you don't see the light in the eyes of a couple of people, partly because of the hat. And I'm very struck by, that would have been something I'd be preoccupied by. I wouldn't have wanted to see black eyes, and that it didn't bother the Museum of Modern Art. They bought the print and she has black eyes. And it's, was really striking to me because I would be sensitive to that. And yet there's an interesting parallel here because your collaborative process and just the one portrait I showed, which was collaborative with this girl, Tia, where she chose, she said, come, we can do a picture in the garden. She was just ready to leave the shelter and she kind of wanted to be in the garden, but clearly she turned her back, and those were the terms of the relationship. It wasn't that I directed her, please turn and do this. And this question of directed, right? Or how explicitly you worked with some of the women in knit clubs always fascinated me. There's also that we were looking together at the frame that had the two images from Taos, and you were struck by the one on the right by Dorothea Lange, and she was in one picture, the same girl was looking directly at her, and the other was in a different kind of quality of light, and she's looking askance. And I said, and you were drawn to the one on the right, the directness, and I was totally drawn to the left because I loved that it wasn't about her relationship to the camera, the lens, Dorothea, how much people then knew what she was doing. Did they ever see it? And I also love in the show that you have other people going back to some of the people. I mean, we do know the story of the migrant mother you know, that Dorothea doesn't go back to find her, someone else does. And likewise, you know, there's another one, the woman with the
Yeah, the woman, Nettie Featherstone.
yeah, and I love that this exhibition points to that, allows them to have presence in an ongoing way. You know, that's just to provoke that question. What happened to all these people? How did they feel? Going back to Carolyn, how we feel making the pictures, how do they feel living with the pictures we've made, which is another area for me of I'm constantly trying to figure out.
I was interested in, you know, the project you showed about immigrants in England, northern.
Well, domestic women who've suffered domestic violence
Yeah,
from various
domestic
ethnicities.
violence.
Domestic immigrants.
And you
yes.
weren't able to show their faces, and so you found ways to, you know, show them.
Well, I really thought their rooms were portraits of their state of being.
Yeah,
and
that's what I was going to ask.
yeah,
There's-
face. I felt it the minute I walked into the room. And the only question was, did they feel comfortable having me in their most private and only space that was kind of a sanctity, you know? And everyone didn't invite me into their room. It's not because it was messy or not. It was just, it was all they had. And that was such a powerful feeling. And actually, I was thinking, I didn't include it, but, you know, had I made a photograph of the photograph that I gave them, you know, I would put their first name and the date and sign it. And, you know, there were little 5/7s that I printed out in the hotel with the Fuji machine. And I remember thinking, I wonder if they'll keep them. Or is this a time in their life that, thank you very much, but I don't want to remember this. And there it is. What do they do with that photograph? So, you know, in my fantasy life of multiple paths future, you know, I'd love to know the answer to that.
So, question for both of you really is about, you know, the nature of the work that you do. Is it, do you see yourselves as documentary photographers, or something else? And what does it mean?
Well, when did documentary photographer, when was that word invented? I'm curious.
Yeah.
Was it
What does that
Dorothea
mean?
Lange, or I don't know.
I mean, it really comes from that time, you know, especially around filmmaking that was being done, both in the UK and also here in this country. Films associated with the Resettlement Administration, Farm Security Administration, and, you know.
This is the beginning of a
Clarities.
very big conversation.
No, I know, but
Because social documentary document the Flaherty history, which is all about creating the illusion of a life that is real. But was it real? But it is enacted by the people that were real, or Curtis, or, I mean,
Yeah.
that would really be fun, but I mean, I'm not sure we have the time. I think it's such a corrupted and complicated word. I would still rather claim it than not, you know. I just, maybe photographer is enough. And yet there are distinctions, and we're not very, I mean, I think it's a really interesting question. I still feel that the work begins by looking at and observing. And that I said to Carolyn the other night, I'm much more conservative than she is. I don't start by wanting to change. And that if that comes in the conversation, but I think that is much more of importance to you. And I love that about Carolyn's work, that she's exploring that territory where that can take her.
Yeah, I think the word documentary and the word portraiture, like those are just, to me, those are categories that I just try and throw out the window, because I like to blur all the lines if I can. And so I work with people a lot. So, but you know, I think we've discussed before, portraiture can be not of a person. You can make a portrait of a place. So if you really start breaking things down, the word portraiture, the word documentary could be opened up to include anything, or closed down to include nothing.
Well, there are differences and you know, one thing I was thinking also that we haven't touched on is when images get framed and then reframed by text. And, you know, you make this point in the catalog and in the show about the captions, or at certain points, Lange or Taylor are taking quotes. And that I know for both Carolyn, I love that you were reading the larger quote and we only saw the text, a fragment. And, you know, for me, the voice of, to the extent to which I can capture something. I mean, and one of my big regrets with the Prince Street Girls is they were so young. All they did was giggle all the time. I mean, I didn't get their reflective qualities that now they have. And it doesn't really parallel the time of the images. So Frankie can talk about those girls, but when they talk about themselves, it's just not, it's not the authentic voice because they're not in the time of the photograph. Just such an interesting difference, you know? So,
What do you mean it's not the authentic voice? Like, what do they say?
well, they will say something about what they remember about being 8 or 9, but do they really have the voice of an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old? So when I would, maybe it's my sensitivity to the sound. When I'm doing carnival strippers, I'm so attuned to the voice. And I want the women who are working to speak on their behalf. And
I mean, it could be interesting to hear the contrast between the voice now and the image of youth. I mean, that might be interesting to juxtapose.
in principle, it's just every time it fails, and it was so strange to me.
Maybe it's not a failure.
Frankie had the emotion. Frankie lost the girls he grew up with. And so he carries the emotion of this loss where they're just living their lives as housewives with children and their husband's a plumber or an electrician or whatever. And they're just living their lives. So it's, I don't know. I mean, these time and who complements the photograph in what kinds of ways. I guess I'm just exploring that, you know.
So in some ways, what I'm hearing is that the documentary of the 30s is rooted in a sense of artifice that's part of photography to begin with, which is something that you're also working with today. You know, that you understand, we understand that sense of falseness in what is portrayed to be true.
Do you want to respond?
You know, what I wanted to ask really is.
Well, I have an answer. I think we live in such, first of all, social media has, I think, changed what documentary is, because I mean, when I've seen the war in Gaza, the images that I've seen that swayed me to be passionate about passionately frustrated with my country for promoting genocide, come from people who are experiencing the war, not from documentary photographers who were sent there. And so I think images, self-representation is kind of the way we are now. And I think that we're in it because people have cameras, everyone has a camera and they use them. And it's part of our language of defining ourselves and our world. And so maybe the way images were read in Dorothea Lange's time, it was just a totally different, like when I look at images in a magazine now, I think they have a different, less impact than they probably did during Lange's time.
So I think we could open up to all of you if there are a few questions from the audience. Anybody have questions to ask of Susan and Carolyn? I'm going to bring my mic to you so that everybody can hear you.
Thank you very much for the fascinating talk. Something that resonated a lot with me, I'm trying to be a photographer, and you asked the question, if you want to go beyond taking nice pictures of people and tell a story, there is this big challenge of how you go deeper. You need to engage with people and tell them what your purpose is. You go really deep in your project. So how do you approach people first and tell them, this is a story I want to tell and I want you to be in it? This is very hard for some of us. So your wisdom there will be very appreciated.
Well, first of all, you don't always know. I mean, you're assuming we know what we're doing. I think when I was trying to share with Prince Street Girls, I'm not making photographs with an intention exactly. I'm really being responsive. So if they feel that energy, and I think that's probably too even with Knit Club, they feel Carolyn's curiosity about them, her want to be included in some way in a dialogue with them, I'm imagining. There are other situations where you have to be highly convincing to enter a shelter and say, I'm going to be protective of your identities, but I am really wanting to have stories to share if you want to share them. That's a different kind of, so finding your comfort zone, I'm sure both of us would have multiple examples of when that's possible and when it's not. There's some situations there is no dialogue, I mean, including what you were just talking about when photographers working under certain kinds of conflict, you don't necessarily have time to explain. There's the assumption that somebody might make as to what you're doing, making the photograph. And I think we're talking about that discomfort is exactly when it's not necessarily clear. So the more you can be clear about why you are so interested in someone or someplace or whatever, I don't know.
I mean, sometimes it's all, I identify with your, the fact that you find it challenging, because I think it is really challenging when you feel a desire to go and photograph something or someone, and you actually might not know exactly why yet. But like for me, when I'm photographing people and developing the language for a particular project, it takes me time to, sometimes not till the end, that I understand what kind of images I'm looking for and trying to create. And it's definitely usually not at the very beginning that I know exactly what kind of images and what I want the person to do for the camera. And it's through getting to know the person sometimes and collaborating with them and finding their ideas, incorporating their ideas, that often leads me to make the kind of image that is right for me. So I think sometimes it's like trying several times with the same person is something that I do a lot. And then I get to know them better and we get to know each other and how we're different, and just being willing to try new things rather than just do exactly what I told them I wanted to do,
And it's being open to collaborating with other people. And for you, even making a commitment to live in a small town in Mississippi for 2 years, to make that your community so that then you're able to collaborate with people. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the Mississippi happened, by a lot of coincidence and being open to letting things evolve without a plan, really. I mean, we were originally going to move, my partner is also a photographer, and we were originally going to move to Memphis, and it didn't work out, the place we were going to rent there. So we looked on Craigslist and found a really cool loft in Water Valley. And so that's why we moved there. And yeah, I think, and and also being patient, like I didn't figure out how I wanted to make photographs in Water Valley till a couple of years after I had already moved away from Water Valley. And I just wanted to, I knew I wanted to make work there. I mean, there were so many things that kept me attracted to that place. And just continuing to try over and over again. Like I try things a lot that fail and or that are in a direction that I end up deviating from, but just not giving up, I think.
So it's after 1 o'clock. I wonder if there's one more quick question and then we'll have to stop. But yes.
Thank you very much for this fantastic conversation. Is there a gender gap in photography in terms of stories? Who tells the stories, whose stories get told, exposure and compensation? Thank you.
Good question.
Yes. I mean,
You noticed.
I mean, I think it's not just gender. There's a lot of people who are privileged in the photography and art world who are people. I mean, I think as Philip knows better than us, but I think institutions are going through a process of trying to change and becoming aware of things like this and trying to rectify it, I think. So, and I think, you know, reflecting back to Lange, I mean, it's incredible to me, how a woman managed to pull off the career she did during that time. I mean, and it's really hard to even imagine what that it's just, we're in such a different place now. And she kind of forged the path, I guess, for a lot of us who do that. It's still hard, I think, but how she managed it is really incredible.
And as a mother with 2 children, which also I think had an impact on her work. But
That's an important factor that Carolyn mentioned, and certainly, and I'm also without children, though many godchildren, that life, that double life or triple life, you know, taking care of the partner, taking care of the kids, the partner that goes off, which, you know, Dixon did a lot of, as you point out in the catalog. I mean, that, and then she's very fortunate to find an extraordinary partner in Paul Taylor. I've always wanted that kind of partner. I never found my partner was a filmmaker doing his own films and could care, you know, when he finally came to Nicaragua, we did one project together. But I think that idea that she had a life partner who was very committed, supportive to, and had a shared vision to a great extent and shaped her vision, I would say, as well. And also you have to remember that Lange didn't see the first really significant show of her work at Museum of Modern Art in 1965, which is poignant to me. I don't know, I'm sure Philip and Sarah would know, you know, at what point are they showing Dorothea Lange in relation to who else they had shown, be it Stieglitz or the history. I do know at Light Gallery, for example, in the early 70s, it was something like the 13th show that they had before they showed, I think it was Nettles was the first woman to be shown at Light. I may have that wrong, but you know, it was multiple years. It wasn't within the first year. So you do have a different current now. It's very obvious. It is different for a museum to acquire a piece of work to be able to say later they have X, Y, or Z, right? Then support someone at the crucial time. And, you know, I have to say, you know, you mentioned the Magnum Foundation, and for me, the forming of the Magnum Foundation by the Magnum photographers was to really expand and diversify the field. And that was something 15, 16 years ago. That it takes a long time. And now I mean, we're very proud to see their work, including what you're seeing from Gaza on Instagram or in the New York Times, or you're seeing, you know, in Southeast Asian coming into the London environment. It takes a long time for the confidence in the process and finding the opportunities and the partners. And, you know, you see it. I think we are in a time where there's more and more change and welcoming of different voices overall.
That's a good place to stop. That was,
Okay.
it's
fine.
I think a good explanation.
Thanks.
So, and thank you. It's been wonderful being here with both of you, Carolyn and Susan and Dorothea Lange. And I really appreciate your coming and being part of our conversation.
And thank you to NGA for featuring Dorothea Lange and inviting us.
Yes, thank you.